So welcome all. As Kim welcomed you, I do as well. Linda and I are talking about the Eightfold Path through a bit of a different lens. And so my title of the talk this morning is The Eightfold Path, an Enlivening Path. I have a confession to make. I haven't been able to read suttas, which are the ancient teachings of Buddhism. I am not able to read them often, not very much, because they trigger me. They trigger me in lots of different kinds of ways. And I was remembering saying this to my meditation teacher back in the 1980s, and she suggested that I learn Pali, the language that these ancient texts were written in, and then I would be able to translate them for myself. I knew I wasn't going to do that when she said it. I knew it was a really good idea, and I knew that it was languages don't come easily to me, and I knew it was a big piece of work. I was in the middle of my graduate studies. I had a lot of other work to do. So all these decades I've needed others to translate and reinterpret these teachings for me. And thankfully, I've found, many teachers who do this whose translations really feel right to me. So, as many of you know, we're having an International Women's Day retreat on March 6th to 9th, and we're having a guest teacher, Nitran, and she has retranslated some of the suttas or re-understood them at any rate. And so if you come to the retreat, you'll get to hear about it from her. Or if you can't make the retreat, you might consider reading her book, Budding Lotus in the West. And I think just on Tuesday, registration did open for this retreat. So if you're interested, you can register. But that's not who I'm going to be talking about today. Today I'm going to reference John Peacock and Akinchino Weber. They're two European teachers whose perspective and translations really resonate with my own. And so I'm going to read a sutta that they work off of and also quote. And this is it's called The Noble Search is the name of the sutta. And so I'm just going to read it as they wrote it. And this is how it's commonly translated. And what is the noble quest? It is when someone who is themselves subject to birth, understanding the drawbacks in being born, seek that which is free of birth, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, nibbana, themselves liable to grow old, fall sick, die, sorrow, and become corrupted, understand the drawbacks in these things. They seek that which is free of old age, sickness, death, sorrow, and corruption, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, nibbana. Mendicants, by the way, that's who the Buddha is addressing. Mendicants, before my awakening, when I was still unawakened, but intent on awakening, I was liable to birth, sought that which is liable to be born, myself liable to grow old, fall sick, die sorrow, and become corrupted. I sought what is liable to these things. Then it occurred to me, why do being liable to being born, grow old, fall sick, sorrow, die, and become corrupted, seek things that are of the same nature? Why don't I seek that which is free of birth, old age, sickness, death, sorrow, and corruption, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, nibbana? FYI, some of the reason I have trouble reading the suttas is they are repetitive, but they are repetitive, I think, because it was an oral tradition and people had to hear it over and over too. They couldn't reference back to the written word. So, but as I read this sutta, it seems like the goal is to get out of the cycle of rebirth, to not be born again. And if you're not born, then you're not going to get old, you're not going to get sick, you're not going to die, you're not going to have sorrow, you're not going to have corruption. In some ways, you'll disappear forever. And I think part of what triggered me about this is related to misogyny. After all, it is women who give birth. And if you read this literally, which I tend to do, perhaps not the best choice, but that's how it comes through in my consciousness. It sounds like we're trying to eliminate that. And I identify as a secular Buddhist because one of the things we share in common with I share in common with other secular Buddhists is that my goal is not to get off the cycle of rebirth. And I'm remaining agnostic about what happens after death. I don't know. And I'm unwilling or unable to take the authority of any religion. So as I think about it, and I did give it quite a bit of thought to be able to write this talk. I really wanted to do that, write this talk and think about it. I think I turn away from the suttas because they feel deadening. Now, many scholars believe that these suttas don't actually reflect the words of the Buddha, but they came later and they were rigidified. They rigidified the words of the Buddha. We'll never know this for sure, but I think they did come later. We'll never know for sure exactly what the Buddha said. But what I can be sure about is that these many suttas, most suttas, feel deadening to me. And so, given that, I've really spent decades of my Buddhist practice seeking teachers and words that awaken and enliven me rather than deaden me. Now, thankfully, John Peacock and Akichino Weber don't translate or understand the sutta this way. In fact, rather the opposite. And Linda's been giving recently a couple of talks leaning into their emphasis on this Pali word appamada, which can be translated as care. And then the opposite of appamada is pamada. And this is how Weber and Peacock understand pamada, which is a loss and constriction about making something which is fluid and dynamic into something static. So what we're talking about is not death in a physical sense, but the death of the way we are in life. I'm going to pause away from that and say that's what really helped me turn my thinking around. Like not the literal death, but the death in the way we are in life. Going back to their writings, teachings. So in other words, I turn communication or language into a habit. I turn my meditation practice into a habit. I turn every dimension of the Eightfold Path. And this, I think, is the origin of the problematic word right, which has become the common translation as sama, which precedes each of the 8 on the Eightfold Path. Because when each of the dimensions of the path become, quote, right, end quote, it becomes fixed, it becomes static. And as a practitioner, what we want to do is bring things to life, both in the metaphorical sense and the literal sense. So if pamada leads to death, then appamada leads to life. The task then becomes engagement and fluidity. We live in an ever-changing world, and the task is to become engaged with that world as much as possible. In a way, the Eightfold Path, although it's not totally comprehensive, engages different dimensions to bring us to life. Now, what Peacock and Weber say really turns my understanding of the sutta on its head. And then I dared to rewrite it. How audacious of me, so that it speaks to what I know. So here's my very quick, this is not written in stone, just my morning's thought. If I was to rewrite that sutta, what would I write? And here goes. What is an ennobling direction in our life and practice? It is turning away from that which yokes us, enslaves us, imprisons us, binds us. It is becoming aware of the old repetitious habits that bind us and seek that which is alive, enlivening, clarifying, and connecting. Dedicating the energies of our lives to ennobling our hearts rather than amassing what creates comfort, safety, and gives us control. By the way, I borrowed that last sentence from Weber and Peacock. So I want to thank them for being teachers who free me in this way. And I'm going to end the talk with a question they pose. How alive does your practice of the Dharma feel? How alive does your practice of the Dharma feel? And I will end with that question, and we will meditate for about 30 minutes, a little short of that. My talk was a little longer, and then we will reflect for 10 minutes, and we will